So really, when I thought about this talk, and I thought about, okay, what have I been learning the last few years? Coming out of AAA and then went into social, did smaller teams, and then now into mobile. I really thought about breaking it down into a couple different parts. One is, what did I learn downshifting, and then what do I think I'm going to have to remember again as mobile changes? Because mobile's definitely changing as we move along, as the market gets more mature. So I broke it down into 2 sets of 5, and hopefully we'll have fun doing this. So the first thing was, I was a little bit scared about this, I have to tell you. So, when you've made big games for a really long time, where you've literally got an army of people, to do everything, you wonder, can I still really make little games? Is it really possible to make games with a handful of people? And the truth is, once you start making a game, it is like riding a bicycle. You just, you start doing it and you go, oh yeah, I remember now. This isn't as hard as I might have thought it was going to be, to refresh those memories and go from the days when it was just me, and then it was 2 people, and then it was 5, and then it was 7, and then 10, 15, 25, and ad infinitum, until we had hundreds making games. So the next thing that really occurred to me is the focus changes. So when you're making big games, you're focused on the long-term goal. You have to think about, how am I going to coordinate all this crap to come together in the future? And when you're making a small game, you're going, what am I getting done this week? What am I going to get done today? And so your focus kind of changes to a much more, in the now rather than in the future. Because when you're making big games, you got to be, if you focus on the now, you'll never get to the future, ever. You got to have people focusing on the now, but as a game maker, you're focused, as a leader, you're focusing on, how am I going to get it all to come together at some point in the far future? The other lesson was, even though we were told something different, quality is still number one. You cannot not make games that don't rock. You have to make games that really hold together. Every once in a while, you'll see something that breaks the rules. You'll see a game where you go, okay, that game's not that great, but it sure is fun. It sure is awesome. But the truth is, most of the time, you've got to make a great game, and you've got to really watch your production values. With whatever resources you have to do less better rather than more kind of half-ass. And half-ass is probably not the right thing to say, but it's close enough. Now, this one was probably one of the most surprising to me. Because in a big team, in a AAA team, you tend to have, you have some superstars. And then you have some really, really good people. And then you have some people who just kind of help you get it done. And the people who ship the game really are the top 15% of the people in the team, are the ones who really push it out the door and make it happen. But you can't get 100% of those people in a big team. It's just really difficult to get all race horses and no draft horses driving a game. So, but in a small game, and this is, if you remember, in my own memory, when I go back, oh yeah, everybody had to be really good. You didn't have any room for anybody who was okay or just good. You needed somebody who was excellent. And so suddenly the talent that you have to acquire not only has to be individually good, they have to be syncing up really well with everybody else. And they have to be people who are pulling their weight and getting it done. And, the way I like to think about this is I'm going from a place where I've got this gigantic group of people who can, achieve objectives. And all of a sudden I really only have like 7 guys or gals, right? I got 7 people who have to do everything. And that's a big difference over saying, oh yeah, I can send a squad over there and a platoon over there and it'll all get eventually done. Nope, you really got just this handful of people who really can make it happen, or not. And that's the difference when you're picking your talent. Are they going to make it happen, or are they going to cause you to not make it happen, or cause you to go there slower? This one was less surprising to me than some of the other lessons, in that you really need to understand your market. You need to understand your customers. You need to understand how marketing is done. You need to have an idea of how you're going to acquire those people. And, for most developers, in my experience, like to ignore marketing. They like to think, no, we'll just make a great game. All that other stuff is fluff. It's not all that helpful. The truth is, it's just as important. It's just as big a pillar as the great game. A mediocre game with great marketing doesn't do any better than a great game with poor marketing. Both of them suffer, typically. Every once in a while, again, there's the exceptions that everybody likes to latch onto and say, look, there's an exception. We'll just follow that. It's an exception, not a rule. The rule is you better understand it. And you better understand it really well. So a development leader who hasn't studied marketing is handicapping themselves. They better have a great partner, a really great partner on that side that they trust. All right, so now we move to the second part. And the second part is this, now mobile stuff is getting bigger, taking bigger teams, larger budgets, larger life cycle for the product development. The customers, are the customers. They're always going to demand better. They see something awesome, your next game better be awesome. They see higher production values, more content, your game better have higher production values and more content. That's the marketplace. The customers evolve. And we've seen this over and over again in every gaming market, where the market starts out pretty small and with very tolerant customers. And over time, it gets really wide, and customers are really not tolerant anymore. They give you 5 seconds, and if they don't like it, they're gone. It's not like the packaged goods market where they have to justify their purchase decision. I don't want to feel stupid for spending $50. I'm going to play a little longer to make sure I made the right decision, rather than I didn't pay anything for this. It's not floating my boat. I'm out in 3 seconds. So when I worked at Disney, every click was an opportunity to exit, was the way I thought about the social game business. Every click was an opportunity for the customer to go, nah, I'm not having enough fun. So you have to make every click pay off. You have to make every experience work for the customer. And so, again, I think talent will be the number one thing as we move up. We can't lose the idea that everyone's got to be awesome, which is hard. All of you hire people. If you're in the business, you know how hard it is to hire the right people at the right place at the right time. And to have them be not only skilled, but also properly motivated to work with what you're working on, motivated to work with a team that you built. And it's challenging. And I think that the people part of this is going to be the thing that we have to continue to focus on if we really want to make games that are going to matter as the market matures. The second thing is, as you scale up, what happens? You get all these layers. So this is a nice, ugly chart of only a medium-sized team, not even a big team. But you end up with middle management. You end up with departments. You end up with people managing other people rather than building the game. They're actually facilitating those people building the game, hopefully. But then you end up with the never-ending communication problems. So the more people you have, when you have 7 people, everybody can talk to everybody, and it's more or less efficient to the level they need to. When you have 70 people, everybody can't talk to everybody anymore, or all there is talk and no game being made. So suddenly you have to narrow the scope of what people get to understand. Their context gets narrowed. When everybody has different context, it takes a little longer to make the game. It's challenging. So, but for the companies that are currently in the mobile space, if they've never done that scale up, the learning curve is pretty steep, and it's pretty heinous for what you actually have to go through to find out, okay, how can I actually have managers of people managers reporting to managers now, rather than one person being in charge. So these lessons, I spent 20 years learning those lessons or more. I hope and I think are going to be more valuable as our scale goes up. And the next is outsourcing. Everyone today probably outsources a little bit of something, but you have to get really good at outsourcing a lot of stuff if you want to be able to scale your team and not have all those bodies sitting around, working inside your facility. The last super big game I did, which was the Old Republic, we outsourced between 60 and 70% of the art, and we still had a 50-plus person art team. So that means we had literally over 100 people because they weren't quite as effective, outside. And there was no way to get it done without that. And I think that you're going to see this across the board already. We can outsource QA pretty easily. almost everybody outsources music and sound unless they have the scale to afford an internal sound person. But I think across the board, we have to learn as a industry to be more fluent in how can we set things up to where remote people can work on stuff for us effectively as the scale goes up. More stuff to do, more game to do. We either have to hire a bunch more people or we have to figure out a way to work with those outsourcing people. And then, on top of all that, when there's more moving pieces, you need more project management. So it's just not the management of the people and the management of the process. It's actually knowing where you are. One of the most interesting things about the big game, the AAA games, is the transparency. Can you figure out where the game actually is versus where it needs to be? Because quite often that's very opaque. It's not clear just how much more coding do we need to do here to make it done. How much, on art and some of the classic, where you can list them assets, you can get closer. You can start to get within the ballpark. But on the things that are high iteration, animation is a good one. Almost all of coding is like that. You don't really know where you are, and so project management is a way for you to figure out where are we, and can we start to project where we're going to be over time. And it's a science of it and an art, both. But suddenly you have to say, oh, I need a PM. I don't need just a producer. Now I need a PM and a producer. And finally, I think that this is interesting, that we're going to have to continue to take risk. If you notice what's going on in the marketplace, the market is not really rewarding not taking risk. And that's, this is standard. Risk equal reward. If you take a high risk, your reward is higher, but your risk is enormously higher too. But if you take zero risk, and how many Clash of Clans clones are going to be in the top 10? I don't hear an answer, but that's okay. We know what the answer is. It's going to be vanishingly small. So taking no risk is actually highly risky if you want the reward. If you just want to say, oh, I want to break even, that's a different story. But if you actually want a high reward, you're going to have to continue to innovate, which means taking risk, which means having the risk of the downside. So even as things get, and what has typically happened in all our previous kind of waves of hardware is the genres have consolidated, the number of things that get presented to the public gets smaller, and there's hyper competition in these categories. And like 2 or 3 entrants win, and everybody else loses. And I think that on this platform, with this wide of an audience, we need a much bigger palette to play with, which means continuing to take risk if we want to expand that market. Otherwise, we'll stagnate like I think most of the other markets, in my view, have stagnated at least once. Sometimes they've broken out of it for a little while, but they mostly stagnate because the money required makes everybody risk adverse. And so everybody's talking about risk mitigation rather than risking for reward. So I hope that we continue to push for this higher risk and success. So short talk, short time to do it in. I'm open for questions or people who have strong different ideas, and wait for the microphone. All right, heckler number 1, Steve. Awesome.
Gordon, it seems to me that while there are many parallels to previous platforms and game markets, one of the fundamental differences with mobile as a platform is that it is in the hands of a huge number of people to whom games were not the reason they bought it. As opposed to consoles, they bought a console because they wanted to play games. Mm-hmm. And here we now have a market where, the majority and maybe the vast majority of the people who have a smartphone didn't buy it primarily to play games. Does that affect how on one hand, maybe it increases the total potential audience for games, but does that affect how we should approach thinking about the games we do for that platform?
Well, 2 things. One is, the PC I think is essentially the same. The PC was typically bought for education or work productivity. And when you look at the numbers, people played a crap load of games on the PC for a long time, right? That it was the Trojan horse to get gaming into more people's hands. Today, I think that, and then it was the browser, right? The browser was the big OS that everybody could do stuff on, which happened to be mostly PC at the same time. You're right about the broader audience wanting different things, and that goes back to the marketing side. Who are you selling it to, and why are they going to be excited about it? And this broader audience isn't looking for the same things that, I think of what are, even though they're in the millions, I think of them as niche products. When you start to get in the tens of millions, you can start to maybe say it's not a niche, but, first-person shooter is a niche audience worldwide. Bottom line, even though it's a gigantic market, and I'd love to have a multi-billion-dollar product that I could say, oh yeah, I did that multi-billion-dollar product. That's awesome. But in the end, we're not selling it to a billion people, right? We're selling it to a few tens of millions in total out of 7 or 8 billion people, right? So it's really niche in the big scheme of things. So I think that the nice thing about the bigger palette, which is how I think about all these devices, it's a bigger palette to do gaming on. So suddenly I can do games for all different kinds of people, for all different kinds of things. They don't all have to be giant mega hits for this to work. But you could really satisfy an audience by targeting them pretty directly and actually having something cool that would only target people in a particular country or only target people in a particular unusual demographic. Where's the grandma game, right? Yeah. That would be awesome, right? To have a grandma game that, grandma said, okay, this is my game. This is the cool game. Now, a lot of them are on casinos and spending their money like crazy already. They already found their game. But you get my point, right? That it's really about, targeting your market. This giant market is not a market. It's a whole bunch of micro markets. Is the way I think about it. I don't think about, a billion, like I went to the talk this morning, 1 billion people monthly on an Android device. That sounds awesome, but I doubt I'm going to sell something to every single Android person, right? I'm going to find a group in there and find some kind of entertainment that's going to get them excited. My other hecklers? Oh, yeah, we'll do the ladies first. Not that they're going to be nicer, but I know what's going to happen over there.
Sort of a broader question, but you mentioned that with console there's an investment that they need to justify to themselves, and so they're a little more interested in pushing the game experience further than, say, free-to-play. There are premium games, however, so what do you sort of see as the balance between games that you buy in a mobile environment for $2.99 or so and those free-to-play games?
I don't know what you're asking me about balance. Can you be more clear? Because
Well,
I think both of them exist, and they're both going to be,
Right.
they're both going to have levels of success.
Right. We've seen in the top charts, for example, free-to-play games dominate versus the games that you purchase. So is there's something that differs about why we should or should not focus on those free-to-play experiences and balance that in the production pipeline against maybe offering premium games?
Well, I think it comes down to the creator, right? When the creator makes a game and they're targeting who they're targeting, they're going, okay, is this better as a free-to-play or is it better as a paid game? And you've seen some, I don't want to call it backlash, but some, the pendulum swing a little bit back toward paid games. You're seeing now some expensive, quote-unquote expensive paid games, $9.99 games, $7.99 games. As people say, okay, well, look, I have something that's definitely a value. It's targeted to people who I know will pay me. Why wouldn't I do it as a paid game, right? Or I have some fundamental where the gameplay in this game is just not awesome for free to play. It's going to feel wonky when people try to do it. So if your game idea and your game experience is not right for free to play, then when you force free to play in it, guess what? It has issues typically. So I think that that's what I mean by the bigger palette. It's just not the bigger audience and the bigger number of devices. It's also the bigger number of business kind of models that you can use for any particular game. So that means that there's a lot, but you can't get caught up in this, I must make a game that's going to reach 100 million people and make $1 bazillion if you want to reach all those things, because not all those models and all those devices and all those types of games can do that. Which is cool at some level, right? It means that there's room for a lot of different people. Monty.
You didn't talk about time, right? there's a certain gestation period that a game requires, and you don't get it
That's
on mobile.
That's awesome.
So
You're right.
tell me about time.
So I think, so here's how I think about time, and even though I've made now games that span 5 years, which was horrendous, plus, because then you start to think, okay, how many games do I get to do before I die? This is a vanishingly small number. It's not ideal, right? I'd rather make more games in the time I have left available to me. But I think here's how I think about time. The first element of time is not how long it takes to actually build a game. It's how long it takes to create a team. Because you put a team together, unless you already have a functioning team of people who know how to operate, how to work together, there's about a 3-month period every time you kind of change the team composition for everybody to composition, for everyone to kind of settle down and know what the pecking order in the team is. It's the same thing, unfortunately. I mean, we're the animal part of us. If you throw an animal into a pack, it takes a while for them to figure it out. How long is it going to take them to figure out who's on first for what? What's your role in this organism that we've created? So the first thing is, it's hard to make a game in under 3 months because you don't even have a team in the first 3 months. Now, how fast you make it after that is really just a function of the scope. But on mobile today, the scope is lower, but still we're seeing more games go over a year all of a sudden. And I remember a long, long time ago when I used to make games in 6 months, and then it went to 9 months, and then it went to a year, and then it went to 15 months, and 15 months was outrageous. It was outrageous that it took us 15 months to make a PC game. But it was just the nature of what we were being asked to do versus the production methodologies and the actual tools that we had to make the game with. And now, our tools got super better, the games got smaller, and that helped us a lot. But it's not, the problem is we're going to get used to that, and then we're going to, I don't think the tools will keep up. Did it
change your definition of done?
Well, I think we didn't talk about launch either, but launch is so different than than packaged good launch. Right now, it's all soft launch, and try to get your game to the right place before you turn on the big marketing. And I probably should have talked about that more on the marketing side, because suddenly, you're responsible for making those decisions when it used to be somebody just said, you've got to have the game to me on this date, and that's the end of that, right? We don't care what it is. We're going to ship it on that date. And unless you were like chaining it inside your facility, you were going to give it up. Go ahead, Eric.
By the way, Gordon, please live longer, because otherwise you'll be depriving a lot of gamers of some games they'd like to play.
No, I don't know about that. I think I'm inflicting it on them. But I'm here to inflict it on them, not for them to.
Okay, inflict long and prosper. So one of the things you covered was the trend with games, every previous game, about how you get the arms race for better technology, better graphics. But doesn't that apply particularly to the niche markets like 10 million copies selling Call of Duty games, rather than to some of the casual games like Candy Crush Saga, which do not have show the same technology and graphics race?
So I think every genre, right, and every market is a little bit different, but the overall tide floats all boats. Meaning once they've seen it and they like it, it's really hard to go backwards. It's just hard for the consumer goes, that looks old. And the moment they say that looks old, it's not good, right? It's not good for all the things that you want as a game maker. So that my experience is that we get driven by this. The platform has standards which are driven by what shows up on it and what becomes popular on it. And, frankly, Candy Crush's production values are very, very high. They're extremely high. I've been playing the game recently, and I was, and looking at it and going, okay, there's a lot of subtle stuff in here that's actually quite well done. This is not kidding around. Somebody spent some time and energy on it. They just didn't slap it together and say, oh, look, I got a match 3 game. And I'll rule the world with it.
Couldn't leave you alone.
Oh, my God, Lynn.
See, I knew this was coming.
See, now, I'm worried about you. You may not be nice.
Now, what I've seen in mobile versus PC is the install base is much more instant gratification, and as a result, much meaner in their the way they communicate. I'm operations manager, so I'm also in charge of customer support. And when I was working on Star Wars games, they were kind because they were fanboys. Versus mobile games where I have been cussed out on a daily basis because I didn't respond within 15 minutes. And so it seems that the mobile audience has less patience. Your insight?
Well, I think that, what you're seeing is transparency. What you're seeing is people just saying what they think, maybe, rather than, society as a whole is probably not as nice as it once was either, which is, one of our minor problems, an environmental problem. But I think that the instant gratification is just the nature of actually who the wider audience is. They have limited time just like the rest of us. And they're going, okay, if I'm going to spend my time, I want the return. I want a high ROI on that time. I want to get my endorphins, and I want my endorphins now. And when your shit doesn't work, I don't like you. I don't like you a lot. And in fact, everything else that's going wrong in my life, I'm going to unload it on you because I happen to have you right now to unload on. Because, you just messed up something I was actually looking forward to. And in fact, if they had zero passion for it, they wouldn't even call you. They would just delete your app and never talk to you again. So in fact, when they actually talk to you, you're on the upside of this. You're not on the downside of it. When they won't talk to you and they just disappear, that to me is the downside. Oh yeah, that they never had any emotional attachment at all. And in fact, we're in the business of engaging emotions. So the more passion we can engage, even when it's the negative passion, is better than the alternative, which is zero passion and zero engagement. So I get more worried about a silent audience than a hate audience. You have to learn to embrace the hate. If you want to have an audience.
Hey Gordon, thanks
Yes.
for your talk. My name is Ben Walsh. I'm the CEO of a indie mobile studio called Pure Bang Games.
My condolences.
Yeah. And I also came from AAA, so all that stuff, yeah, it's totally right on. My question is for marketing, how do you plan for it when just planning for development is a full-time job? When do you find the time to market? And, obviously if you're doing it at the end, it's too late. So I don't know if you could speak to that a little.
Well, I think that, the professional game makers need to plan for marketing from the beginning, meaning that who you think your audience is, and then you need to be figuring out how you're going to test and validate that the game that you built is actually for that audience, and if not, which one? Because you got to find an audience, or you just made a boat anchor, right? Which is not ideal. Something that if nobody likes it, then it sinks into the sea and never seen again. So I think that I'm always, at least in the last 20 years, been thinking about, okay, who's the audience and how am I going to reach them? Is this actually going to work? How do competitive products look around this, and who are their audiences? How do they reach them? Can I co-opt those audiences is always my first thought is, how do I steal somebody else's audience? Because it's so much easier to steal one than to make one. Making one's hard. You got to make them kind of one at a time. It takes forever, right? And you got to have super viral coefficients, and you got to be really good. Whereas stealing one's so much cheaper and easier typically. But today, now everybody's figured out how to monetize us reaching everybody, which makes it harder, right? Makes it more expensive. So at least in the games, so I'm in the same boat, right? I'm running a small indie studio, and from the very beginning we go, how much money are we going to spend on this? Who are we going to hire for it? What's our plan? And we're right at that point where we're starting, external testing in a couple of weeks of our first game. And yeah, we're going to spend some money. We're going to partner with some people who know more about it than we do. We're going to learn as much as we can from them as fast as we can. So there's nothing wrong with partnering with somebody else and working with a quote unquote, whether they call them publishers or co-publishers or whatever. I don't think we have our terminology down anymore, because our terminology is all like 80s terminology, not 2015 terminology. But, working with other people who can help, who have expertise in areas where you're weak, is what I would immediately figure out how I'm going to do it. I'm going to work with somebody. I'm going to learn what I can from them as fast as I can, because time is the real enemy more than even at some point money. Because we're in the entertainment business, and I have 0 minutes. That's the first one I saw, but that's good. Thank you, everyone.